I was not lost in the city. That was the strange part. I knew the streets, the shops, and the way home, but I kept feeling as if everyone else could read something in the place that I could not. I bought the glasses because I was tired of walking through a city I did not understand. Not lost, exactly. I knew how to get home, where to buy bread, which street led to the grocery store, and which bus stop stood closest to my apartment. But the city still felt as if it had started speaking long before I arrived. There were symbols above doorways, dates carved into stone, old shop names painted over, and small signs people passed every day without reading. I noticed them because I was new. My name is Ethan, and I had moved there 6 weeks earlier for work, with 2 suitcases and the careful optimism people carry before they learn a place. I did not know many people yet, so I studied streets the way other people studied faces. Everyone else moved through the streets as if those details had explained themselves years ago. The classes promised a quiet kind of help. They could recognize objects, read short text, translate signs, and compare shapes with public images and records. They did not promise truth. They promised matches. That sounded useful to me. The package arrived on a slow evening after rain. Outside my window, the streets were dark and reflective, and the lights from the opposite buildings stretched softly over the wet pavement. Inside the box were the glasses, a case, a cable, and a folded instruction card. The frame was dark and simple, slightly heavier than ordinary glasses. I charged them while I made tea, then put them on as the apartment settled into evening quiet. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a pale line appeared near the lower edge of my right eye. Setup complete. Please look at an object. I looked at my cup. Ceramic cup. I looked at the lamp. Table lamp. Then toward the window. Window. Low exterior light. The labels appeared softly and faded after a moment. They did not crowd my vision. They only arrived when I paused long enough. That was what I liked first. The glasses did not pull me out of the world. They made me pay closer attention to it. The next morning, I wore them outside. The city felt softer after rain. At the bakery, the glasses read the handwritten note beside the counter. Near the bus stop, they identified a plant growing between stones. On the next street, they recognized a symbol above the doorway of a closed shop. It was the same symbol I had seen everywhere since moving there, a low stone gate with uneven sides and a narrow arch in the center. It appeared on paper bags, tourist maps, public signs, and small metal plaques near the older streets. The glasses opened a short public note. Old City Gate. Common civic emblem. Often used in local markers, souvenirs, and public signs. Before that morning, I had thought of the gate as decoration. Afterward, I noticed how often the city used it to quietly name itself. Over the next few days, the glasses became part of my routine. They translated a notice in the elevator, read worn labels, and identified a loose screw under the kitchen cabinet. They were helpful, but not perfect. Once they labeled a dark blue umbrella as black, then corrected themselves when the light changed. Another time they marked a closed shop as open because an old sign still hung in the window. I liked that they could be uncertain. A device that admitted uncertainty felt easier to live with than one that pretended to know everything. On the 4th evening, I wore the glasses while sorting small things near the front door. I was looking for tape. The shallow drawer under the mirror had become a place where loose objects gathered: batteries, coins, a folded receipt, 2 old keys, a small flashlight, a paper clip, and near the back, a dark metal keychain. I had found it on the day I moved in. It looked like a local souvenir, shaped like the old city gate, too well made to throw away. For a while, I used it on my keys. Then I took it off, put it back in the drawer, and forgot about it. That evening, the glasses labeled the objects one by one. Battery. Receipt. Old key. Metal souvenir. I paused at the last label, picked up the keychain, and held it under the hallway light. The metal was dark and smooth at the edges from being handled. The gate shape was familiar, but not perfectly symmetrical. One lower corner dipped inward slightly, creating a small broken line in the design. I had always thought that was part of its charm. The glasses focused on it. Civic emblem detected. Then the outline narrowed around the lower corner. Variant pattern detected. Another line appeared. Possible public image match found. The glasses had shown public matches for the old gate before, usually signs, postcards, or local history pages. Open, I said. A black and white photograph appeared at the edge of my vision. A hallway. A staircase. A row of mailboxes. Cardboard boxes near a wall. 3 people standing close together, as if someone had asked them to pause while moving things. A pale circle appeared near one box handle. Something small was tied to it. A dark metal tag, flat and shaped like the old city gate. Not the common version. The lower corner dipped inward in the same unusual way. The same broken line. The same variation. I looked from the photograph to the keychain in my hand. Below the image, the glasses displayed the archive caption. Residents removing belongings after structural inspection. Location unverified. Date estimated. No names listed. A structural inspection could explain the boxes. Residents removing belongings could explain the people. A public archive could explain the photograph. But none of that explained why the tag on one box looked exactly like the thing in my hand. I opened my laptop and searched the caption, the image number, and the old city gate with the broken lower corner. Most results were ordinary: postcards, public notices, short history pages, and photographs of street signs. Then I found the same black and white photograph on a plain archive page. No names, no exact date, only the same caption. The photograph was real, the match was real, and the glasses had not invented it. I saved the image and compared the hallway with the entrance downstairs. The staircase bothered me first. Then the window beside the door. Then the mailboxes. They were older in the photograph and arranged differently, but the wall around them looked almost the same. I walked downstairs with the keychain still in my hand. The building was quiet. I opened the archived image in the glasses and let it float over the hallway. I moved a little left, then back. Window frame aligned. Stair edge aligned. Mailbox row partially aligned. I stopped. The people in the photograph had once stood where I was standing. The boxes had been placed near the same wall. The tag had been tied to something carried out of this building long before I arrived. The glasses had not uncovered a secret. Not exactly. They had only noticed a difference in a familiar shape. Until that evening, the keychain had been one more forgotten object in the drawer. After that, it became the first question I could not put away. By morning, I had decided to treat the whole thing like a mistake. Not because I believed it was one. Because that seemed like the most reasonable place to start. The glasses had found an old photograph. The photograph showed a tag that looked like my keychain. The hallway appeared to match my building. Those were observations, not answers. So I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote down only what I could prove. The archive photograph existed. The caption mentioned a structural inspection. The tag in the photograph shared the same altered gate shape as the keychain. The hallway looked like mine. The keychain had been in the apartment when I moved in. Everything else was guesswork. I clicked through the surrounding images in the archive collection. Most were ordinary records of repair work: pavements opened, windows boarded, temporary barriers on streets. A few showed people carrying boxes out of buildings. Some boxes had labels, and in one image a man held a clipboard. Another photograph showed objects with paper tied to their handles. That helped. The inspection had probably required residents to move belongings out of lower storage rooms. Someone had photographed the process because offices made records, not perfect ones, only enough to prove something had happened. Still, I zoomed in on the tag again. The little gate shape was too close to ignore. I photographed my keychain and uploaded it to a visual search tool. The results were mostly useless: souvenir keychains, metal charms, tourist pins, and old gate ornaments. Everything looked vaguely similar because the city used the gate symbol everywhere. but none had the same lowered corner. I tried again with a closer image and asked the glasses to isolate only that part of the design. Variant pattern selected. Search public images? Yes. The first result was the same archive photograph. The second was weaker, a blurry cardboard box with a paper label on one side. In the corner of the label, someone had drawn a small gate by hand, and the lower line seemed to dip in the same place. The third result looked like a wooden cabinet door or storage panel with the same shape stamped into a dark square tag. Possible similarity. Not confirmed. The device had not solved anything. It had only given me another direction. The next sensible step was the landlord. I sent a short message explaining the keychain and asked whether it might have belonged to a previous tenant. He replied about an hour later. I do not know, but I can ask. The apartment was cleared before you moved in, though small things sometimes get missed. I sent him a photograph. A few minutes later, he wrote back. Nice piece. I have seen that gate shape all over the city, but I do not recognize this version. I will ask the previous tenant. While I waited, I went downstairs. The entrance hall looked different in daylight, less like an old photograph and more like a practical space repaired many times. The mailboxes were modern, but the wall around them was older. The first step matched the angle in the archive image. The window beside the door was the clearest match. I opened the old photograph through the glasses and stood near the entrance. Window frame aligned. Stair edge aligned. Mailbox row partially aligned. The photograph had been taken in my building. Near the wall where the boxes had stood, the glasses marked a small smooth patch near the floor. Surface repair detected. It could have been a scrape, a covered screw hole, or damage from furniture. There was no reason to touch it. Back upstairs, the landlord had sent another message. The previous tenant remembers the keychain. She said it was not in the drawer when she moved in. She found it on the top shelf of the hallway cabinet, behind old cleaning cloths. She liked the gate shape, put it in the drawer instead of throwing it away, and forgot about it. That sounded exactly like something a person would do. The keychain had not been waiting neatly in one drawer for decades. It had moved at least once, probably more than once. That made the question wider, but also more believable. Things did not stay in one place for 50 years because a story needed them to. They moved through shelves, boxes, drawers, and hands. The previous tenant remembered only a few old cloths, a cracked plastic container, and spare hooks on the same shelf. The keychain was the only thing she had kept because it looked like a local souvenir. The city gate shape had protected it from being thrown away. Not because anyone knew it mattered. Because it was pleasant to look at. I wrote that down, kept because of design. Then I returned to the old inspection records. One faded scan in a separate collection mentioned the same structural review. Several lines remained readable. Temporary access restriction. Lower storage areas affected. Residents advised to remove personal belongings. Items to be labeled before transfer. The tag in the photograph had a reason now. Not an answer. A reason. If residents were removing belongings from lower storage areas, labels would have been necessary. Boxes needed names, numbers, floors, rooms, something to keep them from being mixed together. The altered gate shape might have been a local tag, a set marker, or a way to group belongings during transfer. I was careful not to decide too quickly. A good guess could still be wrong. By evening, the landlord wrote again. I asked one of the older residents if she remembers the inspection. She said she was young then, but she remembers people talking about misplaced boxes afterward. She does not remember your keychain. She said if you want to ask about the storage rooms, she can speak tomorrow afternoon. Misplaced boxes. That was the first phrase that felt close to the center of it. Not because it was strange. Because it was ordinary. If boxes had been moved during an inspection, some could have been misplaced. If temporary labels were used, some could have fallen off. If a tag shaped like the gate had been tied to one box, it could have come loose and end up somewhere else. Years later, someone could find it in a cabinet, decide it was too nice to throw away, move it to a drawer, and forget it. I looked at the keychain without the glasses. It seemed smaller that way. Less like evidence. More like a thing people had passed along by accident. That made it more interesting to me, not less. A small object saved for the wrong reason. A city symbol altered in a way almost no one noticed. A photograph from an inspection no one had thought about in years. I opened the archive photograph again. The people around the tag box looked like residents, tired, busy, probably annoyed by the inconvenience of moving belongings out of storage. I understood that. If someone told me tomorrow to clear a storage room for inspection, I would label boxes quickly too. I would think I would remember what was mine. I would think a few temporary marks would be enough. And if something went missing, I might complain for a while. Then life would continue. That was how small losses survived. Not because people did not care. Because they had to keep living around them. I compared the tag in the photograph with the keychain. High visual similarity. Not confirmed. The photograph was too old for certainty. But certainty was not what I needed yet. I needed the next question. If the keychain came from a transfer label, which box did it belong to? And who noticed when that box did not come back? The woman who remembered the old storage rooms lived 2 floors below me. Her name was Helen. The landlord sent me her number only after asking if she was comfortable with it. It made the whole thing feel less like chasing a mystery and more like asking permission to step into someone else's memory. I called after lunch. Her voice was steady, dry, and careful. I introduced myself, told her which apartment I had moved into, and explained that I was trying to understand an old photograph connected to the building. I did not begin with the keychain. That felt too specific. So I started with the inspection. Do you remember the lower storage rooms being cleared? I asked. There was a pause. I remember people talking about it, she said. I was young. Not a child, but young enough that adults did not explain everything to me. The lower rooms had problems. Damp, cracks, something with the foundation. They told people to take their things out for a while. For a while? That was what everyone thought. I wrote that down because that was how temporary problems often began. For a while. I told her about the archive photograph, the hallway, the boxes, the caption about residents removing belongings. That sounds right, she said. People used the entrance hall for sorting. It annoyed everyone. Do you remember labels? Oh, yes. There were too many things, and most of them looked the same once they were in boxes. I looked at the keychain on the table. Do you remember metal tags shaped like the old city gate? The pause was longer. I remember the gate. Everyone used the gate. Still does. This one is a little different. One lower corner dips inward. Like a broken line. I expected her to say no. Instead, she said, that sounds like Clara's marks. Clara? Clara. She lived here then. Not in your apartment. Across the hall, I think, or 1 floor down. I may be wrong. It has been a long time. The name felt important, but Helen said it like the name of a neighbor who once borrowed sugar. What were Clara's marks? She liked order, Helen said. She was not official. Not the landlord. Not the inspector. Just someone who could not stand watching everyone's belongings get mixed together. That was the first time the story began to feel human. A building had a problem. People had to move their things. The process was probably badly organized. And one person tried to make sense of it. Helen continued. People were told to label their own boxes, but not everyone did it well. Clara started making clearer tags for the ones waiting in the hall. With the gate symbol? I think so. She had a small stencil, or maybe a hand stamp. It was the city gate, but with that odd lower corner. She said the mark had to be different, so people would know it belonged to the sorting list and not to a shop or souvenir. She was not trying to change the city's emblem, she was only choosing a mark that would not be mistaken for one. I looked at the keychain again. A souvenir to almost everyone. A sorting mark to someone who knew what to look for. Did it work? For most people, probably. But not perfectly. A few boxes were misplaced. People argued afterward, but the building reopened, and life kept moving. I asked if Clara had kept a record. I heard she did, Helen said. A notebook, maybe. Or cards. She was always writing things down. But I never saw it myself. I wrote it with a question mark. Clara, possible notebook or cards. Do you know what happened to her? She moved away years later. We were not close. I only remember her because of the storage rooms. People remembered what touched their own lives. Before we ended the call, I asked if I could send her a photograph of the keychain. She agreed. For several minutes, there was no answer. Then my phone rang again. It does look like one of the tags, she said. But it is cleaner. Heavier. The paper ones were common. Metal ones were for sets. Sets. Groups of things that belonged together. Boxes from the same storage room. Or belongings from the same apartment. I do not remember exactly. After the call, I rewrote my notes. Clara. Not official. Helped label belongings during inspection. Used altered gate mark. Paper labels common. Metal tags possibly for sets. Some boxes misplaced. Possible notebook or cards. For the first time, the keychain had a place in the world. Not a full explanation. A place. I searched Clara's name with the building, the street, storage, inspection, city gate, and lower rooms. Most searches led nowhere. Then I found a scanned page from an old local bulletin. It was a community notice, not an article. A few lines thanked residents for helping organize temporary storage during a building inspection. Near the bottom was a name. Clara V. No full surname. No story. Just a small line in a list. It was enough to confirm that Helen's memory had a record beside it. A name on a page did not explain everything, but it gave the memory a second leg to stand on. I saved the scan and searched again with Clara's name. Nothing exact appeared. Then an old image result led to an expired listing from a second-hand seller. The page was gone, but the cached thumbnail remained. Old metal tags, keys, hooks, and cabinet handles had been arranged on a cloth. One of the metal tags had the altered gate shape. There it was again. Not in an archive photograph. Not in my drawer. In a box of old hardware someone had once tried to sell. That felt believable in a way that made it more compelling. If tags had been tied to boxes during an inspection, they could have been separated later from whatever they once identified. They could end up in toolboxes, junk drawers, storage bins, second-hand lots. Pretty enough to keep. Small enough to lose. I found the seller's current page and sent a message with a thumbnail and a photograph of my keychain. Hello. I found an expired listing of mixed hardware that included a small metal tag shaped like the city gate. Do you still have any pieces from that lot? While waiting, I went downstairs again. Not to discover anything. Just to look with what I now knew. The entrance hall was quiet. I stood where the boxes had been and imagined the scene without making it larger than it was. People carrying things. Someone irritated. Someone trying to keep a list. Clara, maybe, tying tags to handles and grouping belongings that were only supposed to be moved for a short time. The word temporary stayed with me. Temporary had a way of becoming permanent when no one was looking. Back upstairs, the seller had replied. I remember that lot. Most of it sold, but I may still have a few small tags from the same box. I never knew what they were. I can check tomorrow. Just a person who sold old things and might still have something useful in a box. Before turning off the light, I opened the archive photograph once more. The tag hung from the box handle, small and dark. The people around it had no names in the caption. But now one name belonged somewhere near them. Clara. Not as the answer. As the person who had tried to keep the answers from being lost. The seller replied the next morning. I found 2 small tags from the same box. They sent a photograph. On a wooden table were old keys, a cabinet handle, a round metal tag, and one dark piece shaped like the old city gate. The same narrow arch, the same uneven sides, the same lowered corner. I put on the glasses and let them scan the photograph from my laptop screen. Civic emblem detected. Variant pattern detected. High visual similarity. Not confirmed. I asked if I could buy the gate-shaped tag and anything stored with it. The seller wrote back a few minutes later. Of course. It came from a box of old fittings, drawer pulls, tags, and labels. I can include the paper pieces if you want them, but they are not in good condition. Paper pieces. I asked for everything from the same small box. The package arrived 3 mornings later. Inside was a folded piece of cardboard, a small plastic bag, and a note from the seller. These were together, so I left them together. Not sure if the paper is useful. The gate-shaped tag was darker and rougher than mine, with a small hole near the top where string or wire could have passed through. Mine had the same hole, though a split ring had been added later to turn it into a keychain. That answered a question I had not written down. It had not been made as a souvenir. Someone had made it useful again by giving it a ring. I placed both pieces side by side. Mine was smoother, probably from years of handling. The new one looked as if it had spent a long time in a toolbox or drawer. But the altered gate shape matched. Likely same marking system. I opened the folded cardboard next. The paper pieces were brittle and small. There were 3 labels. The first said, Lower Hall. The second said, Return after inspection. The third was the most faded. At the top, in block letters, was Set 12. Below it, written by hand, Clara Fee. The labels did not explain everything, but they connected things that had only been sitting near one another until then. Helen had remembered Clara. The bulletin had listed Clara Fee. The inspection records had mentioned lower storage areas. The archive photograph had shown residents moving belongings. Now these labels put the same words on my kitchen table. Lower Hall. Return after inspection. Set 12. Clara Fee. I photographed the labels before touching them again. The glasses read what they could and offered to search the terms. Most results were too broad, but Clara Fee, combined with the building and inspection, led me to another damaged bulletin scan. Some residents are asked to check temporary storage labels before final return. One lower line remained readable. Questions regarding grouped items may be directed to Clara Fee. Grouped items. Sets. The metal tags were not souvenirs. They had been part of a temporary sorting system during the inspection. What I still did not know was what Set 12 contained, or why pieces from the same system had ended up so far apart. I asked the seller where the small box had come from. It had been bought with old hardware from a house clearance. The seller did not know the family. The box had simply been mixed with tools, hooks, and drawer pulls. That did not solve the route, but it gave the route shape. If Clara had kept spare tags or old labels after the inspection, they could have left the building with her when she moved. Years later, a clearance could scatter them into a seller's box. No one needed to hide anything. The pieces only had to be kept because they were small, metal, and not obviously trash. The seller later checked the note from that clearance. It did not give me a family name, and it did not magically point to Clara. It only said estate box, mixed fittings, and small labels. That was enough. The tags had not come from a manufacturer or a souvenir shop. They had come from someone's kept things, exactly where spare labels and in-use markers would end up after a move. I sent photographs of the labels to Helen. She called 10 minutes later. Those look like hers, she said. You recognize the handwriting? No. The way they are organized. Clara wrote short labels. My mother used to say she wrote as if paper cost more than it did. Do you know what set 12 was? No. Do you know what grouped items meant? I can guess, but guessing is not remembering. I like that answer. What would you guess? That some things were not supposed to be returned separately. A box and a frame. A bundle of papers and a wooden case. Things like that. After we ended the call, I asked the landlord whether any old storage maps had come with the purchase documents. I may have something. I will check. That evening, I took the labels and tags downstairs, not to search for something hidden, only to see whether the words made sense in the space. I opened the old photograph through the glasses. The boxes appeared faintly where they had once stood. I held the label that said Lower Hall. For the first time, the phrase felt like a place. A hall we used because it was available. Boxes placed near the stairs. Labels tied quickly. Metal tags attached to things that should not be separated. Near the first step, the repaired patch I had noticed earlier was still there. Then I saw another low patch near the stair rail, and a third near the corner. They were not proof of anything. But they were all at a similar height. Surface repair detected. Surface repair detected. Surface repair detected. I photographed each patch and left them alone. Upstairs, I laid everything on the table. My keychain, the second metal tag, the 3 paper labels, the archive photograph, and the scan mentioning grouped items. The pieces still did not form a full answer, but they pointed in the same direction. Set 12 had been real. Clara had managed it. The objects in it were meant to return after the inspection. And at least one person had noticed when some part of it did not. Just before I closed my notebook, the landlord sent another message. I found an old storage plan in the purchase files. It shows a lower hall and numbered storage sections. I can send you a photo. The image showed the building's lower level, small rooms, a passage, an area labeled lower hall, and 12 numbered storage sections. 1 through 12. I looked from the plan to the label on my table. Set 12. Until that moment, I had thought set 12 was only a group of belongings. Now it looked like it could also be a place. The last storage section on the old plan. The question changed again. It was no longer only what Clara had tried to keep together. It was what had been stored in the 12th room, and why pieces of it had traveled so far from where they began. The old storage plan changed the way I looked at the building. Before that, set 12 had sounded like a label. A group of belongings. But the plan showed 12 storage sections beneath the building, arranged along a narrow lower passage. The last one sat at the far end, behind a bend in the wall. Storage 12. Not only a set. A place. I printed the plan and placed it beside the labels. The paper was faded, but the layout was clear enough. Lower hall, 12 storage sections, a stairwell, a service door, and a short corridor that no longer seemed to exist. I asked the landlord whether any of the lower rooms still existed. Some were sealed before I bought the building. A few were converted into utility space. I can show you the accessible part this evening if you want. That was reasonable. And necessary. I did not want to force the story forward by doing something careless. At 6, he met me near the entrance with a small ring of keys. I looked at the plan, he said. Some of it matches. Some of it does not. The lower level was changed more than once. He unlocked a door beside the stairs. The air beyond it was cooler. Not frightening. Just older. We went down to a narrow area with pipes along one wall and maintenance supplies along the other. I put on the glasses. Pipework. Utility shelf. Painted wall. Service door. The landlord pointed left. That used to continue farther, I think. But it is blocked now. A flat renovated wall stood where the plan showed a corridor. Not a hidden door. Just a wall, painted the same dull color as the rest of the lower level. I held up the printed plan. Stair position matched. Lower hall likely altered. Storage section layout incomplete. Likely altered. Most of the old storage sections were gone or absorbed into utility rooms. A few traces remained, a change in flooring, a patched corner, a line where an old partition might have been. At the far end, near the flat wall, a shelf held paint cans and spare tiles. Above it, half covered by a pipe bracket, was a small rectangle of older paint. Surface variation detected. The shape was not the city gate, not clearly. But near the lower edge, a shallow scratch dipped inward. I did not touch it. I only photographed it. The landlord looked at me. Is that connected to the keychain? I do not know, I said. Maybe not. Not every mark was a clue. He nodded and handed me another scan from the purchase files. It was an old complaint form. Most of it was ordinary, redacted names, incomplete dates, a note about delayed return of belongings after the inspection. Near the bottom, one line stood out. Grouped items from Section 12 returned incomplete. I read it again. Section 12. Not Set 12. So the label on my table could have meant both, a set from the 12th storage room. That made the wording less mysterious and more practical. People shorten things. They wrote what made sense in the moment. Back upstairs, I placed the complaint form beside the labels. Lower hall. Return after inspection. Set 12. Clara Fee. Grouped items from Section 12 returned incomplete. The phrase did not tell me what was missing. But it confirmed that something from Section 12 had not come back properly. I called Helen. When I told her about the complaint form, she was quiet for a moment. Section 12, she said. That sounds familiar. Do you remember who used it? No. I would rather say I do not remember than give you the wrong name. I appreciate that. But I remember the argument better now, she said. It was not about furniture. Someone kept saying the papers were with the frame. The papers? Yes. Or drawings. Something flat. They said the frame had come back, but the papers had not. Clara kept saying the set had been separated. I wrote quickly. Frame returned. Papers missing. Clara said set separated. Do you know what kind of frame? No. A picture frame, maybe. Or a document frame. I was young, and adults only let you hear the edges of things. That sentence stayed with me. Adults only let you hear the edges of things. Helen remembered one more detail. There was a boy, she said. Maybe 12 or 13. He was crying in the hall. I remember because boys that age tried very hard not to cry. She did not remember his name, but she thought the missing papers belonged to his family. After the call, I searched for complaints related to the inspection and missing papers. Nothing useful appeared. I tried frame, drawings, papers, Section 12, Clara V. Most results were unrelated. Then I searched the archive photograph again, not the tag this time, but the box beside it. The image was too old to read, but one corner showed a narrow wooden edge, like something framed had been packed at an angle. Rectangular frame-like object possible. Low confidence. Low confidence meant not proof. But it gave shape to Helen's memory. A frame had come back. Papers had not. Clara believed they belonged together. That night, I asked the second-hand seller again about the hardware box. From a house clearance. Mostly old tools and fittings. I do not know the family. I bought several boxes together. Objects move like that, a tag separated from a box, a label tucked into hardware, a frame sold without papers, papers placed somewhere else because someone thought they were only old sheets. Nothing had to be hidden for things to be lost. The next morning, the landlord sent one more photograph from the purchase files. It showed the lower level before renovation. On the far wall, above stacked boxes, someone had taped a paper sheet. The glasses did not sharpen it magically. They only adjusted contrast and compared letter shapes. Most of the text was unreadable. But the heading was clear. Return list. Below it were several numbered lines. The 12th line had been circled. A return list meant Clara had not only marked the boxes. She had tracked them. Or tried to. I was no longer looking for a missing object by accident. I was looking for a list that had once known what was missing. And if the list had existed, maybe someone had kept a copy. The return list did not appear online. I searched for every phrase that made sense. Return list, section 12, lower hall, Clara v. grouped items, structural inspection. Nothing. Then I reminded myself that not everything hold had become searchable just because the internet existed. Some papers had never been scanned. Some had been scanned badly. Some sat in boxes with labels no one had typed into a database. And some had simply been thrown away. The photograph from the purchase files proved the list had existed. It did not make it readable. So I asked the landlord for the full folder of old purchase scans. There were insurance forms, repair estimates, photographs of pipes, and notes about renovations. Near the end, I found one image I had missed. A close photograph of the lower level before renovation, taken from a different angle. In the corner, resting on a shelf, was a flat wooden frame. The photograph became soft and grainy, but the shape was clear enough. Wooden frame. Possible stored item. No further match. Helen had remembered an argument about a frame and missing papers. The complaint form said grouped items from section 12 returned incomplete. The return list had once hung on a wall. Now an old renovation photograph showed a frame still in the lower level years later. Many buildings had old frames in storage. I sent the image to the landlord. Do you know if this frame is still downstairs? I do not remember seeing it, but I can check the utility room later. While I waited, I called Helen and told her about the frame. It might not be the same one, she said. I know. But if Clara said the papers were with the frame, then she may have meant a document frame. Something flat. Not a picture for the wall. Could the papers have been inside it? Maybe behind it. Or wrapped with it. People stored papers in strange places when they wanted them to stay flat. I asked if she remembered the boy again. The one who cried in the hall. Yes. He kept saying it was his father's work. Not money. Not jewelry. Work. That word changed the missing papers. Work. Not treasure, not evidence of a crime. Someone's work, drawings, maybe, plans, designs. Something a family had cared about enough to be upset when it was separated from its frame. Helen did not remember the boy's name, but she remembered Clara kneeling to talk to him. She told him she had written it down, Helen said. That if the papers were on the list, they were not lost yet. That was the closest Clara had felt. Not as a name on a label. As a person crouching in a hallway, trying to comfort a boy with a list. After the call, I wrote one line in my notebook. If it is on the list, it is not lost yet. Then I searched differently. Not for Clara. Not for the keychain. For old local work connected to drawings, frames, and the old city gate. One small scan caught my attention. It mentioned a display of architectural drawings by a local draftsman. No surname was readable, only an initial and a first name blurred by a crease. The date was close to the inspection period. The location was not my building. It was probably nothing. I saved it anyway, in a folder labeled maybe. Late in the afternoon, the landlord wrote back. I found the frame. He sent a photograph. The frame was on an eye shelf in the utility room, half hidden behind folded plastic sheets. It looked like exactly the kind of object a utility room could keep for years because no one knew whether it was useful or trash. It was dusty, simple, and empty from the front. The glass was cracked across one corner. I do not know why this was kept. It was probably here before I bought the building. I asked if I could look at it with him present. He said yes. We met downstairs that evening. He had placed the frame on a small work table, with a towel underneath so the cracked glass would not shed pieces onto the floor. The frame was plain wood with dust in the corners and a backing board held by small metal tabs. I put on the glasses. Wooden frame. Cracked glass. Backing board. The next label came only after I turned the frame sideways and a thin brown edge became visible under one loose corner of the backing. Possible paper edge at backing seam. The glasses had not seen through wood. They had noticed a visible edge I had almost missed. We did not pry it open with a knife. The landlord found a small screwdriver and bent the tabs carefully, one at a time. The backing board loosened with a dry sound. Behind it was not a drawing. Only a folded sheet of thin paper, browned at the edges. He looked at me before touching it. Should we photograph it first? Yes, I said. We photographed everything where it was. Then he lifted the paper and placed it on the towel. The fold lines were deep. The ink had faded, but the top was readable. Return list, lower hall. My throat tightened slightly. Not from fear, but from the quiet relief of seeing something that had almost disappeared but had not. The list was not complete. Part of the lower right side was torn away. Some lines were smudged. But one section was still clear. 12th frame returned. 12th paper roll missing. 12th tag confirmed. 12th clarify, to check. Frame returned. Paper roll missing. Tag confirmed. Clarify, to check. The frame had come back. The papers had not. Helen's memory had been right. Clara's list had been real. The landlord was quiet. So the frame stayed here, he said. Maybe after it was returned, I said. Maybe no one knew what to do with it without the papers. Or someone kept the list with it because the missing roll belonged to it. That was the simplest explanation. Not a hidden message. A practical duplicate folded behind the object whose pair had gone missing. A way of keeping the frame and the problem together. That explained why the list had been behind the frame instead of in a file. It had probably not been hidden. It had been kept with the object that made the note necessary. If the paper roll ever appeared, the frame would still carry the only record saying what it was missing. We photographed the list in sections. Then I asked the glasses to read what they could. Text partially detected. Return list, lower hall. Frame returned. Paper roll missing. Tag confirmed. Clarify, to check. For once, the glasses had done enough. Upstairs, I placed the photographs of the list beside everything else. The keychain, the second tag, the labels, the complaint form, and the old storage plan. Now the pieces formed a line. Section 12 had contained a frame and a paper roll that belonged together. During the inspection, they had been separated. The frame had returned. The roll had not. Clara had marked the problem and meant to check it. But the list ended there. No answer about where the paper roll went. I looked again at the line. Paper roll missing. A roll, not loose sheets. Drawings could be rolled. Plans could be rolled. Work could be rolled and placed inside a tube, behind a frame, or beside it in storage. I opened the scan about the local draftsman's display. It was still unclear. But one word near the bottom mattered. Gate. Not the symbol. The old city gate itself. The display had included drawings of the old gate. The same gate that had become the city's emblem. The same gate Clara had used for her marks. I did not know yet whether the missing paper roll had anything to do with those drawings. I only knew the question had become smaller and sharper. Not what was missing from Section 12. A paper roll was missing. And someone, years ago, had believed it belonged with the frame. The missing paper roll was easier to describe than to find. For days, I had been looking for something vague. A set. A tag. A frame. A mark that looked like the old city gate. Now the return list had given it a name. Paper roll missing. That made the search smaller, but not simple. A paper roll could have been drawings, plans, posters, a map, or anything flat enough to be rolled and stored beside a frame. I started with the word Helen had remembered. Work. The boy in the hallway had said it was his father's work. Not money. Not jewelry. Work. I searched old bulletin scans again for anything connected to drawings of the old city gate. The scan I had saved earlier was still the closest thing I had, a small local notice about a display of architectural drawings, the old gate mentioned near the bottom, and a date close to the inspection. Most names were blurred, but the notice said the drawings had been prepared by a local draftsman who had lived in the area. No full story. No clean answer. But enough to keep going. I sent the notice to Alan. She called that afternoon. I remember the boy's name now, she said, before I could say hello. I sat down slowly. Not the family name, she added. Just his name. Thomas. That is how it comes back at my age, she said. A first name, a scene, not the whole life around it. Thomas. A first name. Nothing more. But in a story made of labels and partial records, even a first name could matter. What made you remember? The notice you sent. The drawings. His father drew buildings. Or parts of buildings. Doorways, windows, gates. I remember someone saying the boy should not be so upset because they were only papers. Clara was angry about that. Only papers. That was how things disappeared. Not because everyone was cruel. Because someone decided they were only papers. Clara said they were not only papers if someone had spent years making them, Helen said. After the call, I searched for Thomas with drawings, gate, draftsman, and the old inspection. Most results went nowhere. But one old index listed a small donation made years later to a local records room. Architectural sketches, old city gate studies. Donor, Thomas. No surname in the preview, no image attached, just a short line in an old catalog. If it was the same Thomas, then the paper roll might not have been lost forever. It might have returned to him later. Or part of it had. I wrote to the records room carefully. I explained that I was researching an old structural inspection, a missing paper roll from Section 12, and architectural drawings connected to the old city gate. I included photographs of the labels, the return list, and the altered gate tag. I did not write as if I had solved anything. I asked if they had a record of the donation. The reply came the next morning. We have a small collection matching your description. The catalog is incomplete. You may visit by appointment. That was the first direct door the story had opened. The records room was in a quiet building near the older part of the city. I went 2 days later, carrying copies of everything in a folder. The woman at the desk was kind but careful. She looked through my photographs, then brought out a gray archival box. Inside were several flat folders. The drawings were not grand at first glance. Only careful pencil studies of the old city gate, different angles, stone details, measurements, a cracked hinge, the curve of the arch, and the lower corner dipping inward where the stone had shifted. I felt something settle in my chest. The altered corner on the tag had not been random. It was not a broken souvenir design. It was the real shape of the old gate as someone had drawn it carefully, before the city simplified it into a clean symbol. The stone gate itself had not been redesigned, only the public version of its image had been cleaned up over time. The city used the neat version everywhere. Clara's mark used the accurate one. The one visible in Thomas's father's drawings. The one the Real Gate still carried in stone. I asked the woman at the desk if there was a note with the donation. She checked the folder and found a small catalog card. Donated by Thomas. Recovered after temporary building storage error. Surviving sheets from original roll. Original set incomplete. The woman did not let me handle the card. She turned it herself and read the accession note aloud. That small care mattered. Nothing in the box was valuable in the way people usually meant valuable, but every sheet was old, fragile, and connected to someone who had once needed it returned. The accession note behind the card gave one more plain explanation. A storage box from the inspection had been returned to the wrong family and kept for years because no one knew whose papers were inside. When that family cleared their own storage, the roll was finally identified and passed back to Thomas. By then, some sheets were missing. That was why the record said incomplete. Recovered. Not found by me. Not solved by the glasses. Recovered long ago, at least partly, by the boy who had once cried in the hallway. The ending had not been perfect. The drawings had come back, or enough of them had, but not the entire set. I showed the woman the photograph of Clara's return list. She looked at it for a while. "This might help us update the catalog," she said. "We never knew what the storage error referred to." I gave her copies of everything I had, the labels, the tags, the complaint form, the old plan, the return list, and the archive photograph. She did not treat them like treasure. She treated them like records. A week later, she wrote to me. They had updated the catalog entry. Not dramatically. No announcement. Just a corrected note in a quiet database. Architectural sketches of the old city gate. Part of a set temporarily misplaced during building inspection. Associated sorting records marked by Clara V. Neither the records room nor the landlord found a current address for Clara. The initial on the old notices was enough for a record, but not enough to find the woman herself. After all those years, Clara's name was beside the work she had tried to protect. That was what mattered most. Not because she had solved everything. She had not. Not because nothing had been lost. Some things had been. But she had made a list. She had tied tags to boxes. She had told a boy that if something was written down, it was not lost yet. And in a small, delayed way, she had been right. I visited Helen the next day and brought printed copies of the updated record. When she reached Clara's name, she smiled. She would have liked that, she said. Being in the record? No. Knowing the drawings were not just called old papers. A few days later, the return list and paper labels were placed in protective sleeves. The originals went to the records room with the frame, after photographs were made for the building file. The second metal tag went with them. My keychain did not. The records room said a photograph and measurements were enough, unless I wanted to donate it. I thought about that for a while. Not because it belonged to me in the old sense. It did not. It had belonged to a system, to a set, to a temporary moment when people were trying not to lose track of one another's belongings. But it had also passed through the building, through shelves and drawers, through the hands of people who kept it because it was beautiful. That was part of its story too. I put it back on my keys. For a few days, I noticed its weight every time I unlocked my door. It was not heavy. It only felt heavier because it finally had context. The hole near the top had once held string or wire. Later, someone had added the split ring. Later still, someone had left it in a cabinet. Then another person had saved it from the trash because it looked beautiful. None of those steps required fate. None required a secret hand moving it toward me. They required only the ordinary habits people have around small things. We keep what looks useful. We keep what looks local. We keep what seems too carefully made to throw away. That was how the tag survived long enough for the glasses to notice it. The explanation did not make it less strange to me. It made the strangeness kinder. The object had not crossed time to find me. People had carried it forward without understanding why it mattered. That felt closer to truth than any impossible answer would have. After that, I used the glasses less often. Not because I stopped liking them. Because I understood them better. They did not reveal hidden truths. They did not know what mattered. They did not know Clara, or Thomas, or why a set of drawings could mean more than a box of expensive things. The glasses recognized shapes, edges, matches, patterns and public images. The meaning came afterward, from asking the landlord, listening to Helen, trusting uncertainty, checking records, not turning every scratch into a clue, and letting ordinary people behave like ordinary people. One evening, after everything had been sent and copied and corrected, I stood outside near the old city gate. The real one. Not the clean symbol from paper bags and signs. The stone was uneven when I looked closely. The lower corner dipped inward, just as it did on the tags. Just as it did on the keychain. People walked past without stopping. That did not bother me. A city could not explain itself to everyone at once. Sometimes it waited for someone to notice one small line. I put on the glasses and looked at the gate. Old City Gate. Common civic emblem. Public landmark. Then, after a brief pause, another line appeared. Visual match found. I smiled. For once, I did not open it. I already knew where the match would lead. To a photograph, a hallway, boxes near a wall, Clara V, trying to keep sets together, Thomas waiting for his father's work to come back, and a keychain that had seemed like a souvenir until someone looked closely enough. The glasses had recognized a mark. But that was not what stayed with me. What stayed with me was the reason the mark existed. Not to hide something. Not to lead anyone to a secret. Only to keep ordinary things from being separated from the people they belong to. And sometimes, I think that is all a good record is. A quiet promise that something mattered enough to be returned.